Is your mind separate from your body? Do you have a feeling of two-ness, or is your mind part of your body? Or is your mind in control of your body? This seems intuitive to most of us, but most appeals to modern science refute this. The mind is made up of neurons, synapses, chemical compounds, in other words, matter. So is the mind-body divide simply an illusion? Effect theory is, in part, an attempt to overcome this duality, to synthesize the body and the mind. The idea of effects has a history that goes back to Spinoza's Ethics, published in 1677, but the affective turn, a more thorough engagement with what effects are, came in the mid-90s from philosophers Brian Massumi and Eve Sedgwick. Effect theory can, in part, be seen as a move away from the linguistic turn of the mid-20th century, central to which was the idea that language was the primary way we understand the world, and so an engagement with how language is constructed, used, and changes should be fundamental to theories about human nature or social institutions. Effect theory might be seen as bringing biology, the material world, and the body back into the picture, and uniting scientific and social theories. To start, we might think about how we suppose that the mind and body interact. At its simplest, the body sends signals to the mind through its senses, its sensations. To borrow a few terms from effect theorists, effects are like forces. They are prior to intentions. They are autonomic. They are pre-subjective. They're visceral. They are the intensities that move us. Effects are a way of theorizing about the social forces that we encounter that might trigger the body to respond in a certain way. For the philosopher Brian Massumi, effect precedes emotional states. Effect is not a personal feeling, he writes. Effect is a non-conscious experience of intensity. They cannot be fully realized in language, because effect is always prior to, or outside of, consciousness. We are affected by things touching us, by seeing things, by smelling things, by hearing things. They are like the inputs into the body. In the introduction to one of the foundational texts on effect theory, Parables for the Virtual, Massumi writes that when I think of my body and ask what it does to earn that name, two things stand out. It moves, it feels. The book looks at the ramifications of this simple observation, that the movement of the body produces changes in the world. Our actions have an effect on other bodies. The eardrum, for example, is affected by vibrations in the air. A wall affects our body by stopping its progress. Culturally, words and walls affect us, producing possibilities and limitations. In turn, we produce our own words and our own walls that affect other bodies and then potentially their minds. The way we affect and are affected has to be culturally mediated so that we can make sense of the world. We have to have shared expectations of where walls go and what words mean, what morals and politeness and norms and politics are. Everything affects us in a certain way. One consequence of thinking like this, though, is that it leaves the mind as a slave to outside forces. We are interpolated subjects. That means we are constructed, produced, defined in a certain way by forces outside of ourselves. The question for many effect theorists is, how do we bring change and potential back into the picture? How, Massumi asks, does a body perform its way out of a definitional framework that is not only responsible for its very construction, but seems to prescript every possible signifying and counter-signifying move as a selection from a repertoire of possible permutations on a limited set of predetermined terms? The way out of this is to conceive of the real material world and abstract ideas or minds as the same thing, what Deleuze calls real but abstract. Think of them as part of each other. Take the movement of the arm and the hand. It's real, it's material, it's bodily, it's matter. It is affected in certain ways, but in every movement and every moment it also has abstract possibilities. It has a number of positions it can move to. It might hit a wall and be limited. It's also defined by cultural abstractions, wedding rings, gestures, how words are written. Material in the world is never just material. It's always something more. It always has potential in it. All of these things are part of the potentiality of the hand. It's real but abstract. It's body and mind at the same time. Traditionally, when we think abstractly, we might come up with ideas. National identity is, liberalism is, this plant is. Is implies stability, something frozen in time. But if we think of how the hand is both material and abstract, then abstract ideas must also be material and must imply concrete movements and possibilities. National identity can, liberalism can, and plants can. We have to combine the abstract and the material. Massumi argues that because abstraction and matter are the same, and that matter is always in movement, we should start from process rather than coding. Okay, this may all sound both unnecessarily esoteric and complicated, and you might be thinking, so what? But the way you start theorising about things like national identity and liberalism has huge consequences for how we think about them and how the ideas proliferate into other disciplines, into journalism, into the news, into schools, how change itself occurs. Everything that affects us materially presupposes a range of possibilities, and every possibility presupposes a range of effects. Massumi argues that instead of the duality of nature-culture, or mind-body, or nature-nurture, we need a continuum of each. We don't need social construction, we need social production. So fundamentally for Massumi, affect theory is a way to think about ideas and matter at the same time. Every position of matter in space and time presumes a range of abstract possibilities, and the title of the book refers to Deleuze's concept of the virtual, which was the topic of this previous video. And this might all make more sense if you watch that. In her book Touching Feeling, Eve Sedgwick begins by almost reversing Massumi's starting point. Sedgwick also thinks of affect theory as overcoming the dualistic divide between mind and body, but starts by looking at how we're affected by language. Sedgwick begins with a discussion on performative utterances, a concept by the philosopher of language J.L. Austin that argues that language doesn't just describe the world, but also creates the world. Phrases like "the chair is red" are different to utterances like "I promise," "I name," or "I give to you." The latter actually do something. The language itself has an effect on the world. It creates something. Philosopher Judith Butler famously applied performative utterances to gender, arguing that gender itself was performed, that it constructed and affected the world. A woman does X, or a woman should behave in Z way, have the appearance of describing what a person thinks, or of describing some authentic reality that they believe in, but actually these utterances construct, produce and perform gender. They are affective. Language used in the news, in politics, in books, both the words themselves and the structural way that they are used creates who we are, create our identities. Utterances, affect, language, codes, norms, they all have the effect of constructing subjects in one way and automatically excluding and repressing others. They produce rather than eliminate. They disguise themselves as natural, giving the appearance of being voluntary. This doesn't mean that's all we are though. If we apply Massumi's logic of the arm and hand being real but abstract, having possibilities in every moment, then language has a number of possibilities confined within each configuration. We reconstruct, reorganize and untap the potential within these utterances. Repeating something you read in a newspaper is a good example of this. It's not saying you can't have another opinion, it's just saying here's an opinion for you to repeat. It affects you, it moves your lips. Sedgwick wants to apply this logic to objects as well as language. Like the hand that is always more than what it is, Sedgwick invokes material, texture, that's also more than what it is. Textures have a context. They invoke softness or safety, hardness or danger. Textures also have a history. Fashion and clothing have a history. Jumpers invoke warmness, fires, comfort. The way we experience materials in the world say more than what they appear to on the surface. Effect theory is still in its infancy, and in many ways, and especially for Massumi and Sedgwick, thinking about effect is as much an exploration and experiment, a literary pursuit, as it's a definable theory. But importantly, it's about bringing movement into theory, to moving away from simply thinking about language and social construction, two major themes of humanities departments for a few decades now. It's important to think about fluidity, motion, material, biology, language, and how our bodies and minds are both moved and move. Thank you to Aghast for providing the incredible music for this video, plus this great song you're hearing right now. Check out his SoundCloud through the link in the description below. It's really, really good. If you like these videos and want to support Then and Now, then here's my request. If you think you get as much value from 4 of these videos as you do from just 1 cup of coffee, then please consider pledging just $1 towards the creation of each new video on Patreon, where you can even limit your pledge to just $1 per month. If you subscribe below, then please make sure to hit that bell to make sure you get alerted to new videos, and you can follow me on Twitter and Facebook in the links in the description below. Thanks to all my existing Patreons, and see you next week.